My name is Diamond Evans Holloman. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a PhD candidate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in the Environment, Ecology, and Energy program. My research area, broadly speaking, is on the ways in which socioeconomically marginalized communities navigate disaster. And I do this through an environmental justice lens. This means that I examine the ways in which hierarchical structures of power are embedded in environmental decision making um, in the processes that occur before, during, and after a disaster. My dissertation examines a case study out in Eastern North Carolina with Black and Lumbee Native American populations. So over the past 3 years that I've been out in the field collecting data, I've used ethnographic methods like observation and interviews to understand how socio-ecological concepts like vulnerability, resilience, adaptation, how these concepts take shape in marginalized communities and on the ground, like in everyday lived experiences. So to do this, I use a grounded approach. It's literally called a grounded approach, meaning that my work is community driven and it tends to inform existing theory from a more applied perspective. So coming from folks themselves. So when I decided that I wanted to be an environmental studies major, or double major because I also majored in journalism, I envisioned that I would be spending a lot of my time thinking about trees and the conservation of like various animal species, and basically elements of the world that are wholly non-human. In my first environment and society course, which was then taught by Professor Gerald Mack, I believe, that was probably the first time I engaged with the idea that humans are a part of the environment and not external from it. And so that sparked a whole internal conversation. Well, okay, if we don't have to consider the environment as something that is non-human, then that leaves room to think about how the environment is something that's not out there. It's not some wilderness, some abstraction, but something that's very much in here. It's where we work, it's where we live, and it's where we play. That means places like the city, NYC, also an environment. And so the questions then for me became, well, who benefits from us thinking about the environment in this particular way? Why, when we think about the environment, prior to taking these classes in the ES department, why was I only thinking about Silent Spring? Why was I only thinking about preservation? So, why did I have these dominant narratives? And who does that benefit? So my time in the environmental studies department led me to questions that, like those, that would eventually lead me to the field of political ecology, which is asking about questions of power in regards to environmental decision-making and environmental justice scholarship. I think my curiosity was definitely piqued while I was in the environmental studies program at NYU. People believing I could, honestly. At the time, like I mentioned before, I was double majoring in journalism, and in many cases, a PhD is not necessary to do work well and successfully in that field. So it wasn't something that I was thinking about until I had this long laundry list of questions. And so I seriously started to consider graduate school in about my junior year. And I had so many questions. I had so many things I wanted to read, so many people I wanted to talk to. I felt like there was a gap in the literature when thinking about marginalized communities and climate change, and how if marginalized communities and individuals experience the world differently than those who are not marginalized in their various identities, then wouldn't that also mean that they experience climate change differently? And I really wanted to dig into that point. And I felt like graduate school would be the place, the venue to allow me to do that. And it helps that the program is formulated in such a way that you gain research skills during the capstone, basic ecological knowledge, and concepts in different classes in the environmental science track. Basically, we were set up as students to work on interdisciplinary issues if we wanted to. And it also helped that all of my letters of recommendation for UNC came from the environmental studies department. Again, very supportive. Another thing that helped me find my way toward graduate school is I learned what I didn't want to do. I interned at a for-profit, environmentally friendly business. And while that internship experience was great, I gained generalist skills, knowledge that was incredibly helpful. I learned that just wasn't for me. It just wasn't the path that I wanted to walk. And so that cemented my plans to going into a PhD program and pursuing this long laundry list of questions that I had. Say, if it interests you, pursue it. Take the class. If you don't have time in your schedule to take the class, then audit the class. If you don't have time to audit the class, then ask for the syllabus, read some of the readings, meet with the professor during their office hours, anything, just go for it. You never know where it's going to take you, because my exposure during environmental studies classes to different concepts and frameworks for understanding interdisciplinary issues led me to applying to PhD programs in the subject, and hopefully becoming a professor myself. So I would just say go for it and ask all the questions. I will say this once more. My advice for incoming students is ask all the questions. If you have a question, ask it in class, ask it during the professor's office hours, ask it in an email. Ask all of the questions that come to mind. I hope I wasn't too annoying to my professors while I was in the program, but I just had to know some things, and getting answers, some answers I received and some led to more questions, which led me to grad school and led me down this intellectual trajectory. So go for it and ask all the questions, and good luck.